Let's talk about voting in the United States. Well, in the United States, we are a democracy. We are not a direct democracy. We do not vote for everything. We are a representative democracy. We typically vote for people to represent us in other forms of government, whether that be city councils, the mayor, state legislatures, or governor, our Congress, the president. Those people represent us and are supposed to look after our best interests. We vote based on who aligns best to our ideals, and we hope those people will support us going forward. Okay, well, but there's more to voting than just a simple yes or no. There's different styles of voting. Now, there are things like ballot referendums. An example would be, should we increase the state sales tax or the local sales tax to fund whatever the thing might need to be funded for? Roads, for example, or something. Do we agree to a 1% increase in tax to help fund roads or schools or what have you? It would be put on a ballot at some point. You would show up when you would regularly vote, unless it's a special election, but at whatever date is set, and the question would be there, do you want to increase the tax, yes or no? And then you would vote, and the majority would rule. Now, majority rule is considered first past the post. What is first past the post voting? Well, typically it is the plurality wins. It is whichever option in a field gets the most yes votes, or the most votes for that candidate or whatever. Now, in case you have three candidates running in a race, if you have one person getting 46%, one person getting 43%, and one person getting 11, the person with 46% wins with first past the post. That is kind of how that system works. It does have some drawbacks, because if you know that third person is not going to get up to that 40% mark, you are not incentivized to vote for them if you don't think they are going to win, or they would never have a chance, especially with the US's two-party system. A lot of times it leads to third parties and other parties not getting voted for, even though you may like that candidate, because you don't think they have a chance to win, and you feel like you have to choose between the other two parties. Okay, then there is a majority first past the post, a majority voting system. What is the majority voting system? Well, first example would come to mind is Georgia, when Georgia had its Senate races both in 2000 and 2022. They ended up going to a runoff. Why did they have to have the runoff? Well, the field was larger than two people, and not one candidate got beyond 50% plus one vote. So because no one had a true majority of the vote, that 50% plus one vote, they had to hold another election with just the top two finishers in the previous election, and then they had to vote again, and somebody had to get above 50%. So that is the true majority system. You have to get over that 50% mark. Now, it is entirely possible that you could have a wider field than just two people and still get over that 50% mark in any given contest. But for those places that do have the absolute majority requirement, you would end up with like a runoff election, or a secondary election like that, to make sure that one of your candidates got over the 50% majority number. Okay. Then there is the third option, which is ranked choice voting. Alaska currently has ranked choice voting. Now, how does ranked choice voting work? Well, I will take the current presidential race right now. You have Kamala Harris, you have Donald Trump, you have RFK Jr., you have Jill Stein, and you have, I believe it's Chance Oliver. It could be Chase Oliver. But you have the Libertarian candidate, for president. Now, what you would do with 5 contestants is you would go in and you would look at all 5 and you would label them 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 in the order that you would want them to win the election. Okay, and then they tally up everybody. And if there isn't a clear winner after the first round, so if the number of people who voted for options 3, 4, and 5, if they all vote, if all of their votes would account against for parties 1 or 2, one way or the other, if it could flip potentially who would be in first or second, they start going through the supplemental rounds. That does not mean you vote again, but what they do is they look at your selections. So for those people that would have voted for the Libertarian candidate, they would look at their number 2 pick. So if their number 2 pick was, let's say, RFK Jr. or Jill Stein, those vote totals would go into those candidates. And then they would say, okay, are we back at a point where there's a majority? No. Okay. They look at the next lowest person and they divide those out. If it's Jill Stein, they would say, okay, well, all of Jill Stein's voters, they would look at each vote individually and say, okay, who wanted RFK Jr., who would want Donald Trump at number 3, and who would want Kamala Harris at number 3. And they would start adding those numbers into the total. If there still wasn't a majority winner, they would look at RFK Jr.'s numbers and go, okay, well, RFK Jr. didn't get 50% of the vote, and he's the 3rd on the totem pole. So we will look at all of his voters. Which way did they vote for their last option? Who did they pick for 4th? And then they would look at adding the total in, and then they would end up with a clear majority winner. And that person would win the election. Now, in the United States, we also have the Electoral College. And the Electoral College is its own thing. But what is the Electoral College? Well, in the race for the president, you don't actually vote for the president. You vote for how you want your state's electors to vote. It's complicated, but essentially each state has a number of electors equal to the number of members of the House of Representatives plus 2, 1 for each senator that they have, and the winner of each state's presidential election goes on and votes those delegates for president. And then you have to get a majority of the Electoral College to win the presidency. The current number sits at 270. So, using Iowa as our example, Iowa has 6 electoral votes. We have 4 districts in the House of Representatives, and we have 2 senators. If in November, no matter which side wins the general election in November, whether it is Donald Trump or Kamala Harris, those electoral votes will go and they will vote for whoever wins. That 6 votes could go to Donald Trump, could go to Kamala Harris. And that's what we mean when we're talking about flipping a state red or blue, especially with swing states. Now, when it comes to the Electoral College, there are some states that are deemed safe one way or the other, and there's been some argument as to whether or not we should get rid of the Electoral College and go to a straight vote, a popular vote. And it is possible, but that would require a constitutional amendment, and I've done another video on what it would take to do a constitutional amendment. That is in my Government Answers playlist. So, with the 270 vote, that is how the Electoral College works. Now, Maine and Nebraska are slightly different. Now, how are they different? Well, both Maine and Nebraska assign the 2 votes from the Electoral College from the Senate race, or from the senators they get, to the winner of the popular vote statewide for the presidency. So if in Nebraska Um, if it goes for Donald Trump, those two votes would be two electoral votes for Donald Trump. But then the districts for the House of Representatives are tallied separately, and they go to the winner of that district. So it is entirely possible that you could have one district go to Donald Trump, you could have one district go to Kamala Harris. It is entirely, those two states allow the House districts to be separated from how the rest of the state votes. So that is a very different system there. Um, One other thing with voting, as far as ballot measures go, you have to be careful and read the question and make sure you understand what ballot initiatives are, because sometimes they will phrase a question in a way that you think voting yes would be something you're supporting, but by voting yes, you're actually against whatever they are suggesting. Now, what do I mean? Well, there was a case with Ohio. Ohio was going to have a ballot measure for abortion on the ballot in November. But there was a special election early on um, about whether or not to allow that ballot question or to change the rules on how you get a ballot question like that on the ballot. And if you voted yes on that question, you were in favor of changing the rules to prevent the abortion measure from being on the future ballot. But then when the future ballot comes up, you need to go in then, and because you had to vote no for the first one, so the abortion question would be on the ballot in November, and then you had to vote yes for the abortion question at a separate election. So you have to be very careful on how um, they word things, and sometimes they will also um, reuse the same numbers. So if it was Proposition 1 on the ballot using the changing the rules in Ohio, it may also be Proposition 1 in November when they have the abortion question on the ballot. So you have to make sure you read the question very carefully. But that's just a few of the different ways of voting and what the different voting styles are that we use here in the United States.